Joining me now is former CIA Deputy Division Chief for the Koreas and the Heritage Foundation Northeast Asia Senior Research Fellow, Bruce Klingner. Bruce, what do you make of this? It is a great historic moment that these three prisoners were released by North Korea back here at home safely on U.S. soil. But the kind of reaction that you will hear from Vice President Cheney and Leon Panetta is one of doubt in terms of what Kim Jong-un might concede to. What do you make of this?
We certainly welcome the release of the Americans. We're always concerned when any Americans are detained by North Korea, and we welcomed all the previous Americans when they were detained and always were concerned about their safety. But the president is raising expectations about his success, doing things that have never been done before with Kim Jong-un. But as Vice President Cheney and Mr. Panetta will say, is that we've been down this path many times before. There were euphoric expectations each of the 8 times we had international agreements with the North in the past, and all of those failed. So we do need to temper expectations.
James, what do you make of this, though? What is different now that could change the outlook for a true denuclearization on the Korean peninsula? Is that possible?
Yeah, that's a question. Certainly, these are beautiful images, a beautiful moment, so different from Otto Warmbier's return. But as Mr. Panetta noted with Maria, we've gotten these head fakes from this evil regime in the past. I guess my question would be, I think to answer your question as well, the difference now may be a more of a sanctions bite. Maybe China really is being helpful at last. Bruce, is this a different situation in terms of more economic pressure, or do you see this as similar to the times in the past where these hopes have not been realized?
Well, in many ways, we're in uncharted waters. Kim Jong-un, up until January, had been very isolated. He had not even left the country since he came to power. He had not met any leader. And now, all of a sudden, he's going on a diplomatic initiative really on steroids. He has been having a rapid-fire initiatives. My discussions with North Korean officials indicate that he may come in with a very large proposal, perhaps denuclearization in return for a peace treaty and normalization of relations. The president has, imposed stronger sanctions, though still not maximum pressure. We're still pulling our punches on a number of things. But I think it was the sanctions. I think it was a number of factors, the concern both in North and South Korea about potential military strike by the U.S., and also the changing in South Korea from a conservative to a progressive president made Pyongyang much more likely to reach out.
Lee, just in terms of the messaging of these three hostages, detainees arriving here in the United States and the president greeting them in the dark of night, it was really moving. That was the reaction as when I woke up this morning at 2 a.m. Like, people were tweeting about it, ready to see this happen. And it was a high mark so far, I would argue, in this presidency.
I would say so, too. I think one of the things that is really, really powerful is these symbolic gesture moments. This is a symbolic moment where a lot of people were afraid of what was going to happen in North Korea. Now you see that these hostages are being returned. We have this meeting scheduled. There's a lot of hope. A lot of people saying, well, maybe the president's somewhat scary tactics, a lot of people were afraid of how he was dealing with North Korea, are paying off. On the other hand, you also hear some folks who are saying, you know what, maybe we're being played in the same way that George W. Bush was played with Putin. Remember when he came back and said, I saw into his soul. And so I've heard a lot of people say, I'm just not sure that we should trust this yet. What do you think? Do you think that we should be trusting this and celebrating this moment? Or do you think he's going to play us?
Bruce?
We certainly need to be wary and careful given all of the past failures. Also, North Korea has not been very forthcoming publicly on the details of what they would do for denuclearization. But what has been said, both through South Korean delegations and Kim's visits to China, is it's still very highly conditional. It's not putting up the nukes on the table unconditionally. It still is very much what they've been saying for years, is the U.S. has to remove what they call our hostile policy, which usually includes removal of troops abrogation of the treaty with South Korea, the defense treaty, and the removal of the U.S. Nuclear umbrella, or extended deterrence guarantee. So we're not seeing a major change on their conditions for denuclearization.
Former Secretary of Defense, former CIA Director under President Barack Obama, Leon Panetta, issuing this warning to President Trump in his interview with Maria. Listen.
Now, of course, there's North Korea. That is front and center. How significant should we believe these meetings have been?
I don't trust North Korea, and I think that's probably a good place for the president to be. This is a period of accommodation. You look at the history of dealing with North Korea, we've gone through periods of provocation and periods of accommodation. I'm concerned about whether or not they're serious about denuclearization. Their principal goal is to protect their regime. How are they protecting their regime? They develop nuclear weapons. They're developing ICBMs. I find it very difficult to believe that they're suddenly going to give up on that.
Well, Bruce, that's just essentially what you've been saying.
Exactly. Even in the January 1st New Year's Day speech, where that's seen as Kim's sort of diplomatic outreach to the South, in that same speech, he was saying that, yes, they finally completed the nuclear ICBM capability and that they should increase production of their nuclear weapons. And then that was affirmed in an April speech. So it's a bit hard to believe that after having completed this program, after really 50 years in development, and saying that they're going to increase their production of it, that all of a sudden he's going to give it away for nothing. So I think we do need to be very wary. The president needs, obviously, to go in with his eyes open to make sure that we do get what we want, which is the complete, verifiable, irreversible dismantlement of the nuclear weapons programs, which is what's required under 10 different UN resolutions.
Right, and what we did not get through the Iran nuclear deal that the president decided to exit earlier this week.